If Danganronpa wasn't bad, it would be good. Such is the opinion of every true Danganronpa fan. It's sort of impossible to like Danganronpa without accepting that it's stupid and kind of bad, but by accepting that reality, you can like it anyway because it's almost kind of good, if you ignore the stuff that isn't. It's a sort of bad that's very interesting to talk about, which is one of the reasons it often inspires obsession. I caught that obsession back when Danganronpa first came out, then it ran its course and eventually fell out of my life entirely. But I heard that Danganronpa 2 was getting a re-release with new content, and then I saw the entire trilogy on sale for a total of $10. Either one of those alone wouldn't have meant anything, but together they gave me just enough incentive to revisit that past obsession. And having replayed Danganronpa for the first time in over a decade, I've been dragged back into the quagmire of stupid plot points, clunky controls, annoying anime tropes, and frustratingly variable quality. And unfortunately, I do still like it. Before I get into the meat of the video, there's some housekeeping that I need to get out of the way. First, like many early 2010s properties that originated in Japan, I first experienced Danganronpa through fan translations. And like many fan translations of early 2010s properties that originated in Japan, they were an extremely mixed bag. Danganronpa, however, has the relatively rare status of getting an official translation that is arguably even more of a mixed bag than the fan translations. To avoid confusion, I'll be using the official translations for most of the terminology, as that's the more ubiquitous version these days. It's also what I played most recently, and it's what I have footage of. This includes referring to characters by their given names instead of their surnames. Second, I understand that there's a substantial amount of auxiliary content that expands upon the main games, including anime, light novels, and spin-off video games. I don't care about any of them. I have some limited knowledge of the deeper lore, but it's overwritten, hideously complicated, and typically detracts from the actual story. Finally, I haven't played V3 since I had more or less moved on by the time it came out. My understanding is that it can be interpreted as a related but parallel entity to the first two games, but I didn't want it to influence my analysis for this video. I'll probably play it before 2x2 comes out, but for now, I know only the most basic information about it. With that out of the way, let's get into the nonsense. Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc is a 2010 visual novel made by Spike Chunsoft. It follows 16 students who have been trapped in their high school by a stuffed bear named Monokuma. To escape, a student needs to kill one of their companions, then avoid being caught and condemned by the rest of their class in a trial. If they succeed in misleading the other students, everyone else is killed while the culprit goes free. But if the majority of the students vote for the correct killer, they get to continue living, but the culprit is killed. The game has 6 chapters, each culminating in a class trial. The first 5 are individual murder cases, while the 6th has the remaining students unraveling the greater mystery of who Monokuma is and why they're in the situation to begin with. Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair came out in 2012 and is a direct sequel to THH. It follows a very similar premise with very similar rules. Another 16 students are trapped by Monokuma, this time on an uninhabited island, and forced to kill each other to escape, but it benefits greatly from being the second attempt the team had at the genre. Its characters are generally more interesting and contribute more, the mysteries are on average a bit better, the gameplay is more diverse, and it's all around just a bit more polished. Goodbye Despair is in direct conversation with Trigger Happy Havoc. While the setup and basics are similar, the differences exist as specific counterpoints to the original. This is most apparent in the 3 main characters of each game. THH has Makoto, Kyoko, and Byakuya, while Goodbye Despair has Hajime, Chiaki, and Nagito. Both trios are made up of a fairly milquetoast player character, a consistently helpful female deuteragonist, and an inconsistently helpful male tritagonist. But the dynamic of those trios is radically and purposefully different in the 2 games. Makoto is the most emotionally intelligent member of his trio, but Kyoko has to basically lead him to every conclusion, and Byakuya is a pompous jerk who is nowhere near as smart as he thinks he is, but still wants to survive the game and is ultimately useful in their eventual victory over Monokuma. Hajime is also the most emotionally intelligent member of his trio, but he actually pulls his weight, and it's a very collaborative effort between him and Chiaki for most of the game, with both having their own strengths but working in tandem to keep everyone else going. Nagito, on the other hand, is extremely competent and capable of single-handedly solving entire cases, but also completely crazy and fully willing to die to further his specific nutjob philosophy. The difference in those dynamics culminates in the final chapter of each game, and continues into the post-game events. While Makoto, Kyoko, and Byakuya escape their situation and go on to work together as part of the Future Foundation, both Chiaki and Nagito die in Chapter 5, leaving Hajime on his own to lead the other survivors out of the Neo World program. THH has a fairly hopeful ending, while Goodbye Despair ends on a somewhat bittersweet note. That sentence should have just activated everyone watching this who is familiar with Danganronpa, so I guess it's finally time to talk about some of the really dumb stuff. The main theme of the Danganronpa franchise is hope versus despair. The games treat those 2 concepts, along with luck, as measurable and almost magical things. The students all attend Hope's Peak Academy, which is seen as a national symbol of hope for the world's future. The villain's goal is to induce despair in everyone she comes across, for somewhat convoluted reasons. Makoto is a firm believer in the power of hope, as is Nagito in his weird way, while Junko, the mastermind of the first game, is seen as despair incarnate, and Hajime is a center point between hope and despair due to his status as Izuru Kamakura, and he decides on a more moderate philosophy. This is dumb. Putting aside the quantifiability of concepts, hope and despair aren't perfect antonyms. You could argue that they aren't even slight antonyms, and in fact that's a fairly common thing to explore in stories. But Danganronpa plays it completely straight with no further analysis, taking it for granted that hope and despair are opposing cosmic forces. But if you can also put aside the clunky word usage and wanton memory manipulation and brainwashing to the point of removing personal agency, you're still forced to reckon with the fact that the world was completely ended by a single high school girl who then used all of her accumulated power and influence to force 16 people to kill each other, a goal so important to her that it was apparently worth dying for. If you wanted to be extremely generous, you could read Danganronpa as a story about overcoming nihilism and recognizing that no choice is meaningless. But that could easily have worked without the bonkers world-ending plot and accompanying scope explosion. As things stand, each Danganronpa game has 5 chapters of small-scale interpersonal intrigue, and then a final chapter with world-shattering reveals and consequences that make the rest of the game feel utterly pointless in comparison. And the games clearly want me to critique them on this level, because they're explicitly performances put on for the player. When you load into a scene, you can see the backdrop being moved in. The characters are all cardboard cutouts, and the video cameras that appear in every area are established as being specifically for people in the outside world to view the events of the game. The tutorials speak directly to the player, and Monokuma constantly breaks the fourth wall. Each chapter is split into distinct sections, several of which are portrayed as intermissions to give the audience a break. The characters are all explicitly archetypal, and many of the tropes are played and framed for audience appeal instead of characterization. Danganronpa wants to be analyzed on a meta level, asking the player to examine their own morality and complicity in forcing the game characters to kill each other, but if I meet Danganronpa on its asked for terms, it becomes a weaker experience than if I give it the grace of a lighter degree of meta-analysis. My morality kind of ceases to make a difference when the world has literally ended and people are being brainwashed by a high schooler into committing atrocities. I may be forcing the characters to kill each other by playing the game, but the whole setting has fallen apart in such spectacular fashion that 10 or so deaths lose any impact they could have. Add onto that the heavy usage of the unexamined false dichotomy of hope versus despair, and it becomes extremely difficult to take seriously in any meaningful way. Danganronpa is a very silly and deeply flawed experience. It repeatedly shoots itself in the foot and commits an astounding number of unforced errors. It's a mess of compelling concepts with awful execution, unmotivated but extremely heavy-handed motifs, and frustrating gameplay. And I like it anyway. I enjoy the majority of the murder mysteries, and while some of them are really annoying, an equal number are exciting or interesting. Social links are a bizarre addition to the experience, but they're enjoyable and can add surprising depth to characters that otherwise seem fairly two-dimensional. I love Chiaki, Nagito is extremely interesting, Kyoko, Byakuya, Fuyuhiko, Peko, Mahiro, and Sonya are all compelling, and I know the rest of the cast all have their devoted fans. Danganronpa is frustrating and intriguing in equal measure. It's so consistent in its inconsistency that it's difficult to be anything but disappointed with the complete product. But despite everything, I still like these extremely stupid games, and despite everything, I'm still excited to play 2x2.